Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will build out the front end for the new campus post type. Let's begin by editing the campuses link up in the header to point towards the All Campuses archive screen. So in order to make that edit, let's jump into our text editor and open up header.php of our theme folder. Here's the header navigation. Here we see the campuses link. So let's just adjust the href. So remove the placeholder hashtag and then drop into PHP. And let's echo out get post type archive link. And the name of the post type is campus. And then in terms of making the link light up yellow when we are on a campus page, all we need to do is target the opening li element, drop into PHP, and say only if, and then parentheses for the if condition, only if get post type, and that's a function, so it gets its own set of parentheses, only if that returns a value of campus, only if that is the case do we want to add a CSS class. So we would echo out a bit of text, single quotes, and then within there we say class equals, double quotes for the class name, current menu item. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. Now if I test out that link up in the header, you'll notice that the screen is empty and up in the tab title bar we see page not found. Now we've been through this before. You know that whenever you register a new post type, you're probably going to need to clear or rebuild WordPress's permalink structure. So let's jump into the admin, go down into settings, permalinks, click Save Changes to rebuild the permalink structure. And then if we go back to the front end and now click on campuses up in the header, cool. So we see Downtown East and Downtown West. So these are the posts that we would hope to see, except this is not the formatting that we want. When it comes to campuses, we want to create an interactive Google map with pins for each location. So in other words, we need to use a custom template for this screen. Now at the moment, this is being powered by archive.php. So if we want a unique template just for campuses, we can go into our text editor, and in the theme folder, let's create a brand new file. And let's name this new file archive-campus.php. Just as a quick test, you can say hello 123. Just to confirm that yes, we are editing the right file for this URL. And in order to save ourselves a lot of typing, why don't we use archive-program as a starting place? So let's jump into archive program and just highlight the entire file and copy it into our clipboard. And then back in our brand new file, paste that in. Let's scroll up to the top and let's just customize things to make sense for campuses. So for the page banner, the title should be maybe Our Campuses. And for the subtitle, why don't we say, we have several conveniently located campuses. Give that a save. And now we can work on customizing this template, right? Because instead of just a simple text-based list of the campuses, we want to create a map with pins for each post or location. Now back in our text editor, at the moment you can see that we're outputting the permalink and title for each post. But now the question becomes, how can we access the latitude and longitude or the address of each post? Well, check this out. Right after the title and then a semicolon, let's create a variable, and we could name it whatever we want. Let's call it map location, and let's set it to equal the results of a function named getField, and then within the parentheses we just pass in the name of the custom field that we are interested in. Now remember in a previous lesson when we created this advanced custom fields for the map, you might not remember the field name that we gave it, but to refresh your memory we gave it a name of map_location. And just to make this code a bit more readable, why don't we drop down to a new line right before map location here. Okay, so far we haven't output anything onto the screen. We've just created a variable that stores the value of that custom field. Now, before we worry about accessing the latitude and longitude of this field, why don't we first just answer the question of what in the world lives inside the value for this field, right? Is it a string of text? Is it numbers? Is it an array? Is it an object? What is it? What is the data? So to find that out, what we can do is call the PHP function named print_r, and then let's just pass it the name of that variable. We named it map location. Okay, let's go ahead and save this, and then on the front end, we can see that right after the title of each post, we have that information about the variable. So it's an array. The map custom field is going to return an array to us, and it stores things like the address. There's the address. And we see that it also has a property named lat for latitude. Here's the latitude value, and lng for longitude. Cool. So back in our text editor, if, for example, we wanted to output the latitude for each item, we could just look inside our variable, map location, and remember to look inside an array, it's just square brackets, and then we could say lat for latitude or lng for longitude. So just as a test, we could echo this out, and be sure to add a semicolon at the end of that statement. Cool, so we successfully accessed the longitude for each item. But we don't actually want to display it like this in plain text to the visitors of our website. Instead, we want to output the latitude and longitude in a structure that JavaScript can easily access. Right, because it's JavaScript that's going to communicate with the Google Maps service. So let's jump back into our text editor and let's clean this up a bit. In fact, let's just delete all of this and get a clean slate. So let's just delete from the opening li list item to the closing li list item. And instead, let's create an opening and closing div tag. And on the opening div tag, let's give it a data attribute of data-lat for latitude. And let's set that to equal x just as a placeholder for now. And then let's give it another data attribute of data lng for longitude. And let's also set that to a temporary placeholder. And let's also give this div a class of marker. This way our JavaScript can easily find this element. Okay, so now we've structured things so that JavaScript can easily access the latitude and longitude properties. Now we just need to output the actual values here instead of x and x. So maybe up here, while we are still in PHP mode, right underneath the post line, why don't we create a variable that stores the map field data, just like we did a moment ago. So we could name this whatever we want, but let's call it map location and set it to equal get field, and the name of the custom field was map location. So we've got this variable. Now let's just actually output the latitude and longitude values. So let's remove this placeholder x, drop into PHP, and let's say echo out map location. That's the name of our variable. Let's look inside the array with square brackets and get the latitude value. And then let's do the same thing for longitude. So get rid of the placeholder, go into PHP. Within the PHP tags, let's echo out map location, look inside it for longitude. Okay, now just a moment ago we had a list item for each post instead of a div. So that would make sense that we wrapped all of that in an unordered list opening tag and closing tag. But now that we've got a div, why don't we change this? Instead of an unordered list, let's open it up before the while loop with a div that has a class of ACF map. There's nothing magical about this name. It's just for a bit of CSS styling, and it also will give our JavaScript something to hook on to. And let's update the closing tag. So instead of an unordered list, let's change it to a closing div tag. Okay, now let's save this. And if we check out the front end, we don't see it yet because we haven't implemented any JavaScript. But if you right click on this and choose inspect, here's the wrapper div with a class of ACF map. And if you inspect inside it, cool, we see a div for each campus post, or in this case, each map marker or pin. And they each have data attributes with the exact latitude and longitude values. So from here, now we just need to implement a tiny bit of JavaScript to use all of that data to construct an interactive Google map. Now, luckily, Google will do most of the heavy lifting for us. So the first step is not for you and I to write a bunch of JavaScript. Our first step is to just load in or pull in a JavaScript file that lives on the Google servers that they created. So in WordPress, when you want to load a JavaScript file on the front end, what you want to do is go into your theme folder's functions.php, and if we scroll down a bit, way back towards the beginning of the course, we created this function named University Files, and within it, this is where we loaded our CSS and JavaScript files. So on this line, WP onQScript, this was an example of how to load a JavaScript file. Now that's what we want to do again now, so to save ourselves a bit of typing, why don't we just copy and paste and duplicate this line? So copy, and then right above it, let's just paste it in again. And then we can just edit this line of code to pull in the Google Maps script from the Google server. So WP onQScript, the first argument is the name that we get to make up to kind of label the script. So let's change this to maybe Google Map. The next argument is the location that points towards the file. So we can delete all of this all the way to the comma, right? Because that's the argument. And instead we want to point out onto the internet, out onto Google's server. So let's begin with a pair of single quotes, and then within those, we could begin with HTTP or HTTPS, but certain web hosts and certain browsers will throw an error message if you're not on a secure connection and you try to load assets from a secure connection. So instead, we can just begin the address with // and then the URL to point towards Google server is maps.googleapi.com/maps/API/JS for JavaScript, and then question mark key equals, and then this is where you paste in your Google Maps API key. And then all of the other arguments for this function will work just fine. Null, meaning this script doesn't depend on any other files. Version 1.0, that's fine. We can just make up a version number. And true to indicate that we want to load this JavaScript file down towards the very bottom of our HTML instead of up in the head section. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And we can test things out to make sure that it's working by refreshing the front end of our website. And then if we view the page source and then scroll down to the bottom, oops, actually need to scroll up a little bit. But here we see a few script tags, and here we see the Google Maps URL. So if you click on it, and it successfully opens a new tab with a bunch of code, that means that we're in business. So we can go ahead and close that. Let's close this view source and move on to the next step. So we've loaded the JavaScript that lives on Google servers. Now we just need to write a little bit of JavaScript on our end to basically feed our latitude and longitude values into the Google Maps script. Now I've actually already prepared the code for us. Let me show you where to look for it. So in our theme folder, let me close out of these open files. In our theme folder, let's look within our JS or JavaScript folder. And then let's look inside this subfolder named modules. And let's jump into the file named googlemap.js. So I've already created this file for us. Down here we can see that the code is going to find any div that has a class of marker, right? And those were the elements with the data attributes for latitude and longitude. So then all of this code, if we scroll down, it's just going to pass on the latitude and longitude onto the Google map. Now if you're wondering where all of this code came from or how I knew to write this code, well, I actually did not write this code from scratch. You'll remember that we're using the plugin named Advanced Custom Fields. So I just Googled for the official Advanced Custom Fields website, their documentation, and they have a page on how to work with the Google Map custom field. And this plugin has great documentation. So this page basically describes the steps that we've been going through, and most importantly, if we keep scrolling down, here we can see a bunch of JavaScript code to look for elements with a class of marker. and then work with their latitude and longitude, right? So this is where I got the JavaScript from. And then I just pasted it into this file and converted it to be object-oriented. But long story short, we're not going to go over this line by line and learn how it works, because I don't feel like that's a very great learning experience. This is really boring boilerplate code because we're just working with Google Maps API. But don't worry, we've got tons of educational JavaScript content remaining in the course. For example, when we create our live search results functionality, we will be going through that JavaScript line by line, concept by concept. It will be educational with plenty of learning experiences, hopefully a few aha moments. But when it comes to this boring Google Maps code, we're kind of just going to gloss right over it. So we've got this file named Google Map in our modules folder. Let me close out of that. But what we need to do now, if we jump into this scripts file that lives in our JS folder, this is our main file. This is sort of the recipe file for our JavaScript. This pulls in all of the individual ingredients and then mixes them all together in one big bundled file, right? We see this file named scripts-bundled, and that's the file that WordPress is actually going to load on the front end. So what I want us to do now is import or include in the Google Maps module into this main file. So right here, we've got this comment named our modules or classes. We're already loading in the mobile menu code and the slideshow code for the home page. So let's just go ahead and add a new line, and let's import in the Google Map code. We could name it whatever we want. Why don't we call it Google Map, and then we import it from quotes to give it a string location, // to look in the current folder, and then let's dig into the modules folder. And then the file name was googlemap.js, but in this case, we don't need to include the .js. Semicolon at the end. Okay, so we just imported a class that we named Google Map. Now we just want to instantiate a new object using that class. So down here, let's say var or variable. Let's create Google Map. Notice this time it's lowercase because this is just an object that's being created from this class or blueprint. So Google Map equals a new instance of our Google Map class. If none of this makes sense right now, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Because again, once we get to the live search results portion of the course, we can take the time to really understand in depth how all of this works. But for now, let's go ahead and save this. But we are still not done, because now we need to rebundle or recompile this file. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need to use our command line. So jump over to your command line, and let's begin by navigating to a certain directory. So cd and then space. And then in my case, I'm going to go into local sites. And then in my case, this fictional university folder is where these important files live. Webpack.config, gulpfile.js. So basically, I want you to navigate to wherever these files live. So in my case, I'm going to drag this folder on top of my command line. Okay, and now we have two options. If you run gulp watch, that's going to spin up our local preview proxy server. But more importantly, what that's going to do is now, anytime you save a change to a CSS or JavaScript file, this command line tool will be watching and waiting for you. So basically, if I hit save again within this main script file, notice that the command line automatically starts rebundling and recompiling that file for us. Okay, so that's option one. I'm going to push Control-C to close the gulp watch task. Let me clear out this screen so it's easier to read. If you don't want to always have that gulp watch task running, your other option is to just manually run gulp scripts, and that will rebundle and recompile things for us as well. Okay, so now if we go back to the front end of our website and refresh, you might need to perform a hard refresh, but here we have it, an interactive map with our two pins. Here's our West Campus and here's our East Campus, and visitors of the site can zoom in, they can zoom out, they can drag around. Cool. Now in our next lesson, we're going to learn how to set things up so that you can click on one of the pins and see the name of our campus, and even click on a link to go to the individual post for that campus. And then we will also set up the template file for single campus. It should be a lot of fun. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.